Cannonier will stall his way past Michael Venom Page.
I'm back, I'm ready to compete, I'm ready to get back to my title run.
I have the utmost confidence in my potential. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here doing this. I will be a UFC champion one day, sooner rather than later.
Cannonier is on a mission to fight his way back to a title shot.
How do you see this fight actually playing out?
Pressure, making him miss, action if he goes, action if he doesn't. I want to put my hands on him, and if I get my hands on him, I'm going to put him down. I see myself winning.
MVP vs Cannonier are set for the main card of UFC 319, and although Cannonier is 41 at this point and a lot of people are leaning with MVP to win this fight, I'm here to tell you Cannonier will not only win the fight, but he'll dominate as well. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm JuicyMMA, I make opinionative MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. Also, if you guys are enjoying the content and want to support the channel, be sure to hit that join button for members only live streams, videos, alongside with other perks as well. But anyways, let's get into it. When the UFC originally put this fight together between MVP and Cannonier, I didn't really know what to think. Stylistically, it's kind of a weird matchup, and also MVP is making his way up to the middleweight division for the first time in the UFC. So for Cannonier, I thought this was kind of a weird fight. If he does beat MVP, he's beating a guy who just made his way to the division. So I don't know how much that win over MVP is going to push Cannonier in the rankings, and as I touched upon before, Cannonier is 41. So if he wants to make one last shot or one last run for the title, he doesn't have much time, and at this point I think he needs matchups that's really going to push him forward in the rankings quickly. But regardless, the more I started to think about this fight between MVP and Cannonier, the more I started to lean with Cannonier. And when I look at the betting odds and when I look at a lot of the fans' sentiment leaning with MVP, I kind of didn't understand why. But before we can get into specifically why I think Cannonier is going to beat MVP, let's quickly take a look at Cannonier's game and see what he does well out there. So when you talk about Cannonier, it's pretty clear that this guy's main ability is a striking game. On the feet, Cannonier does a few things well. For one, he stays relatively technical. When you talk about Cannonier, he has a really good ability to fight out of either stance, either conventional or southpaw, which gives him the ability to show different looks to his opponents and just make it a little bit harder for his opponents to land shots on him, while at the same time, he's able to land a lot of big shots on his opponents by giving them different looks and essentially confusing them. But outside of just his ability to stay relatively technical out there, Cannonier also has a pretty good process. A lot of times we see early on, maybe Cannonier will take a couple more shots than you would like him to, but as the fight does progress, whether it's progressing in the first round or progressing in the fight in general, he does a pretty good job at finding his range, finding his reads, and then he starts to land a lot of big shots. And when you look at a lot of the fights that he's been successful in, I think we've seen that extensively. And even in the few fights where he lost against Caio Borralho, as well as Nassourdine Imavov, even in those fights, he was able to stay technical, he was able to land big shots, and he was almost able to get a victory in both of those fights. But the last thing that really puts everything together for Cannonier is his power. As I touched upon before, when you look at a lot of the victories Cannonier has in the UFC, most of them are via KO. And the ridiculous amount of power that Cannonier has is certainly a huge reason for why that is. So overall on the feet, Cannonier does a lot of different things well, and when you combine all three of those things together, you get a really good and a really effective striker, which Cannonier has been over the years. But outside of just his striking, Cannonier does a pretty good job at utilizing his physicality. And what I mean by that is he does a good job at forcing his way into the clinch and even at times finding takedowns. Of course, for the most part, as I touched upon before, Cannonier is going to look to strike. That's usually where he has the most success, and that's usually where he's able to find his finishes. But at times, if the fight's not going the way exactly he would like it to, he has the ability to utilize his physicality, force his way into the clinch, and at times find takedowns. And Cannonier's ability to force his way in the clinch really helps him out in a couple different ways. The first way that it helps him out is he's able to keep his opponent in front of him and land damage. In the clinch, Cannonier does a good job at landing a bunch of knees and especially elbows, and from that point he's able to land a lot of damage on his opponents and he's able to win minutes of the round. But outside of just landing damage, Cannonier also utilizes the clinch in order to stall out the fight a little bit. Whereas if the pace of a certain fight is going a little bit too fast for Cannonier, he can then utilize his physicality, force his way into the clinch, and slow down the fight a little bit like that. So I do think his ability to force his way into the clinch is a very effective method or a very very effective weapon that Jared Cannonier can sometimes go to, and we've seen that in a lot of his fights. But the next question that some of you may be wondering at this point is why specifically do I think Jared Cannonier is going to beat Michael Venom Page? Well, in my opinion, it comes down to a couple different reasons, but the first and main reason I want to touch upon is the clinch. Because as I mentioned before, Jared Cannonier does a really good job at forcing his way into the clinch, especially when the striking isn't necessarily going his way. And when you look at this specific fight against MVP, I think it is going to be very difficult for Cannonier to have success striking at a long range. So because of that, I think Jared Cannonier is going to look to pressure a lot more in this fight maybe than usual, force his way into the clinch, and from that point he can then start to land a bunch of big elbows and knees in close. And I think the clinch work of Cannonier is going to be even that much more effective in this fight versus MVP, because as I touched upon before, MVP is moving up from a weight class below, so at this point you would assume Cannonier will be the stronger guy in there. So if he's able to force his way into the clinch, it's going to be very difficult for MVP to get away. I think we saw this extensively in a lot of fights, but specifically when you look at RDR versus Robert Whittaker. Now obviously Cannonier versus MVP is not exactly the same, but we saw in that fight RDR was significantly bigger than Whittaker, and Whittaker had a lot of trouble getting away from the clinch. And I think going into this fight, we could see somewhat of a similar thing, where Cannonier would be forcing his way into the clinch and MVP would find it very difficult to break away. And even if he does break away eventually, it's certainly going to gas him out significantly. So I do think the clinch work from Jared Cannonier is going to be a huge factor in this fight. But the next reason for why I think Jared Cannonier is going to beat MVP is due to the power. Because as I mentioned before, at range, this is going to be a very difficult fight for Jared Cannonier. But if MVP is fighting at range, having a lot of success, landing a bunch of shots on Cannonier and winning the fight for the most part, it only takes one shot from Cannonier to land. If he's able to land some sort of a counter right or left hook clean on MVP, I do think there is a decent possibility he can find a finish. Because obviously when Cannonier lands clean on essentially everybody, he's able to find a finish. But when you also consider the fact that MVP is moving his way up from the welterweight division, that power of Jared Cannonier can be even more effective against MVP as compared to some other guys in the division. So I do think the power is also going to be a significant factor in this fight. But overall, if I had to give an official prediction for this matchup, I certainly would lean with Jared Cannonier to win this fight via decision. Because I do think the power could be a factor in this fight, and I actually think it will be, but at the end of the day, I think the majority of this fight is going to be fought in the clinch between Cannonier and MVP. And in the clinch, I think Cannonier is going to be landing big shots, winning minutes, landing big elbows, landing big knees, and at the end of the day, I think he's going to win this fight via a 29-28 sort of decision. I think in one round of the fight, Cannonier is going to find it difficult to find his way into the clinch. Maybe MVP would break off, maybe MVP will have some success at range and win one round, but at the end of the day, I do think Cannonier is going to be able to do enough to win at least 2 rounds in this fight. And as I said, I think it's going to be a 29-28 sort of decision victory for Jared Cannonier. And assuming Cannonier is able to win this fight, from that point he would be on a 2-fight win streak, he would move up a little bit in the rankings, and we'll see where he goes from there. As I touched upon before, he is 41 at this point. We'll see how many more wins he is able to get under his belt, and if he is able to make that secondary title run at this point. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening there. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Jared Cannonier is going to stall his way past MVP, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now. And until the next time, peace out, guys.